The year 1066 is one of the most famous dates in English history. It was a year of dramatic change, a year that saw the end of one era and the violent birth of another. Before 1066, England was a powerful Anglo-Saxon kingdom. It had its own unique language, its own laws, and a rich culture that had developed over many centuries. The country was ruled by a king and a council of powerful nobles known as the Witan. This system had provided stability for a long time, but the death of a king without a clear heir would soon throw the entire kingdom into chaos, creating a power vacuum that powerful men across Europe were eager to fill. England in the mid-11th century was a wealthy and well-organized land. Its fertile fields produced abundant crops, and its towns were growing into busy centers of trade. The Anglo-Saxons were skilled administrators and had a sophisticated system of government. They had shires or counties, each with its own local court and sheriff to enforce the law. This structure made England an attractive prize. Its wealth was known far and wide, drawing the envious eyes of ambitious rulers. The country's strong foundations, however, were about to be shaken to their very core by a succession crisis that would change the course of its history forever. The king at the heart of this crisis was Edward the Confessor. He had ruled England for over 2 decades, since 1042. Edward was a pious and respected ruler, but he had one major problem. He had no children. This meant there was no direct heir to inherit the throne when he died. As he grew older, the question of who would succeed him became more and more urgent. Several powerful men believed they had a right to the crown, each with their own story and their own claim. The uncertainty created a tense political atmosphere, as nobles and foreign rulers alike began to maneuver for position, anticipating the king's inevitable death. On January 5, 1066, King Edward the Confessor died. His death triggered a monumental struggle for power. The Anglo-Saxon Council, the Witan, acted quickly. They chose Harold Godwinson, the most powerful earl in England, to be the next king. Harold was a respected military leader and a popular choice among the English nobles. He was crowned the very next day in Westminster Abbey. However, his coronation was not the end of the story. It was merely the beginning of the conflict. Across the English Channel, another man was watching these events with fury, believing the throne of England was rightfully his. The man who felt betrayed by Harold's coronation was William, the Duke of Normandy. Normandy was a powerful and ambitious duchy in northern France, populated by the descendants of Viking settlers. William was a tough and ruthless ruler, a skilled soldier, and a brilliant politician who had spent years consolidating his power. He claimed that the late King Edward, who was his distant cousin, had once promised him the English throne. William also insisted that Harold Godwinson himself had sworn an oath to support his claim during a visit to Normandy a few years earlier, making Harold's coronation an act of profound betrayal and perjury in his eyes. William was not a man to be trifled with. He immediately began preparing for a full-scale invasion of England to take the crown he believed was his by right. This was a massive undertaking that required immense resources and political skill. He had to build a huge fleet of ships from scratch, capable of carrying thousands of soldiers, horses, and supplies across the treacherous English Channel. He also had to persuade the nobles of Normandy and neighboring regions to join his risky venture. He did this by securing the Pope's blessing for his invasion, which turned his personal ambition into something that looked like a holy crusade against a usurper. But William was not the only claimant challenging King Harold. Another formidable threat came from the north, from a man named Harald Hardrada, the King of Norway. Hardrada was a fearsome Viking warrior, known for his immense size and battle prowess. His name literally meant hard ruler. He also had a claim to the English throne, based on an old agreement between previous English and Scandinavian kings. He saw the turmoil in England as his golden opportunity to restore a great Viking empire in the north. He assembled his own massive fleet and army, ready to strike England and seize the prize for himself. So in the summer of 1066, King Harold Godwinson found himself in an incredibly difficult position. He was facing the threat of invasion from 2 different directions at once. To the south, William of Normandy was gathering his forces, waiting for a favorable wind across the channel. To the north, Harald Hardrada of Norway was preparing to sail with his Viking army. Harold had to defend a long coastline and guess where the first attack would come. He called up his army, the Fjord, and positioned them on the south coast, expecting William to be the first to arrive. It was a long, tense summer of waiting. The first blow fell not in the south, but in the north. In late September 1066, Harold Hardrada's Viking fleet landed near the city of York. He was joined by Tostig Godwinson, King Harold's exiled and resentful brother. Together, they defeated an English army at the Battle of Fulford. When King Harold heard the news, he made a bold decision. He marched his army north with incredible speed, covering nearly 200 miles in just a few days. On September 25th, he surprised the Viking army at Stamford Bridge. The battle was a resounding victory for the English. Both Harold Hardrada and Tostig were killed, and the Viking threat was eliminated for good. It was a brilliant military achievement for King Harold, but he had no time to celebrate. Just 3 days after his victory at Stamford Bridge, he received terrible news. William of Normandy had finally got the favorable winds he had been waiting for, and had landed his army on the south coast of England, at Pevensey. Harold's army was exhausted and battered from the battle in the north, yet he had no choice but to turn them around and march them all the way back south to face this new, even greater threat. It was a grueling march that left his men with little time to rest or recover before the most important battle of their lives. On October 14, 1066, the two armies met on a ridge a few miles from the town of Hastings. Harold's English army took up a strong defensive position at the top of the hill. They formed a tight shield wall, a formidable barrier of interlocking shields and spears. For hours, William's Norman knights charged up the hill, but they could not break the English line. The Norman archers fired clouds of arrows, but many flew over the heads of the English, or bounced harmlessly off their shields. The battle raged all day, with fierce fighting and heavy casualties on both sides. It seemed as though the English shield wall would hold forever. The turning point came late in the afternoon. The Normans pretended to retreat, a clever tactic designed to lure the English from their strong position. Some of the exhausted English soldiers broke ranks and charged down the hill in pursuit, believing they had won. This was the mistake William had been waiting for. His knights turned around and cut down the isolated Englishmen. The shield wall began to weaken and break apart. It was during this phase of the battle that a stray arrow is said to have struck King Harold in the eye, killing him. With their king dead, the English resistance collapsed, and William had won his great victory. William's victory at Hastings was not the end of the fighting, but it was the decisive moment. He marched to London and was crowned King of England in Westminster Abbey on Christmas Day, 1066. This event marked the beginning of a new chapter in English history, the Norman era. William, now known as William the Conqueror, faced years of English rebellions, which he crushed with brutal efficiency. He replaced almost the entire Anglo-Saxon ruling class, the earls and bishops, with his own loyal Norman followers. This was a complete political revolution, transferring power and land from English hands to a new French-speaking elite. One of the most significant changes was the introduction of the feudal system. William declared that all the land in England now belonged to him as king. He then granted large estates, known as fiefs, to his most important barons in return for their military service and loyalty. These barons in turn granted land to lesser knights, who were sworn to fight for them. At the bottom of this pyramid were the English peasants, who were tied to the land and had to work for their new Norman lords. This system fundamentally reshaped English society and concentrated power firmly in the hands of the king and his chosen nobles. To control his new kingdom and cement his power, William embarked on a massive castle-building program. All across the country, formidable stone castles were built, such as the Tower of London. These were not just defensive structures. They were powerful symbols of Norman domination, a constant reminder to the English people of who was now in charge. To better understand the wealth of his new domain and to tax it effectively, William also commissioned a huge survey of the entire country. This survey, completed in 1086, was recorded in the Domesday Book, an astonishingly detailed document that gives us an incredible snapshot of life in 11th century England. The Norman Conquest changed England forever. It transformed its language, as thousands of French words flooded into English, creating the rich hybrid language we speak today. It altered its laws, its architecture, and its relationship with mainland Europe, tying England's destiny more closely to France for centuries to come. The Anglo-Saxon England of King Edward was gone, replaced by a new, dynamic, and often harsh Norman England. While the Conquest was a brutal and traumatic event for the English people, it laid the foundations for the powerful, centralized state that would eventually become the modern United Kingdom, leaving a legacy that is still visible in the landscape and language of England today.